Top 10 Facts About the Serial Killer Time Forgot. Welcome to Odd Occasions, where we uncover the dark, the unusual, and the stories that have been left in the shadows. Today, we're exploring the chilling tale of a man whose monstrous crimes shook an entire continent, but who has almost been forgotten by history. Pedro Lopez, the monster of the Andes, confessed to murdering over 350 young girls across Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. Yet, few know his name. Join us as we delve into the terrifying facts surrounding one of the most ruthless serial killers the world has ever known. Get ready for a deep dive into pure horror. Number 10. Origins. On October 8, 1948, Pedro Alonso Lopez was born in Santa Isabel, Colombia. When his mother was only 3 months pregnant with him, a gang had murdered his father. Lopez was the seventh of 13 siblings, raised by a single mother who worked as a prostitute. Tragically, by the age of 8, Pedro's life took a dark turn. His mother expelled him from the house after he was caught fondling one of his sisters. After making his way to Bogotá, Colombia's capital, the young boy joined a group of homeless children and began using bazuco, a cheap and impure form of cocaine. Eventually, he caught the attention of a man who offered him shelter, even promising him a bed. Number 9. Cruel World. He was found on the streets by a couple from the United States when he was 10 years old, and they took him in. He went so far as to enroll in a school specifically designed for orphans. Lopez was sexually assaulted by a teacher when he was 12 years old, putting an end to his happiness for a brief period of time. He fled for the streets, which was the only place he had ever known to call home. After a number of years had passed, Lopez himself would address his sentiments over his sexual assaults by uttering the following quote, "I decided then to do the same to as many young girls as can be." Number 8. First murders. Lopez made a living for himself by stealing automobiles and selling them to chop shops throughout the course of the subsequent 6 years. When he was finally apprehended and taken into custody, he was once again subjected to sexual assault when he was raped by multiple individuals while he was incarcerated. This time, however, Lopez would not be a hapless victim, and the monster of the Andes was formed when he stalked and killed the men guilty for the crime with a knife that he had made up on the spot. His actual reign of terror would begin when he was finally liberated, and it would leave the entire world in a state of shock. Number 7. Monster of the Andes. When Lopez arrived in Peru, he immediately began searching for young women at the many markets in the country. Occasionally, he would follow and observe a possible victim for several days, waiting for the appropriate moment to strike. At the appropriate moment, he would entice the girl to go by promising her gifts, such as a hand mirror, and then he would leave. Following their journey with him, they would make their way to one of his hiding places, which frequently featured a cemetery that had already been prepared. Between the hours of morning and the time that they were violently raped, he would hold them tenderly and comfort them by hugging them. In the aftermath, Lopez suffocated them as the sun began to rise. On average, it took between 5 and 15 minutes for some of his victims to pass away. When he recalled it later, "I was going to suffocate her as soon as the sun dawned. I could only consider it a success if I could see her eyes. I never committed a murder during the night. Without the light, it would have been a waste of time. By day, I was required to keep an eye on them." Number 6. Escalation. When it came to murder, Lopez had an insatiable appetite. As he went on his rampage, he was responsible for the deaths of 2 to 3 young girls each and every week for a period of 3 years. Always adhering to his established pattern, he would occasionally leave the dead bodies of his former victims in one of his shallow pits while he enticed a new lady to enter it. It was then that he started holding what he called parties with the deceased during which he would prop them up in their shallow graves and conduct conversations with them. Number 5. Narrow escape. By the year 1978, Lopez claims that he had murdered more than 100 children. Despite his best efforts, he was unsuccessful in his attempt to kidnap a child of 9 years old. Instead, he was apprehended by a small tribe in Peru, who then subjected him to the laws of the tribe. His entire body was drenched in syrup, and he was buried in sand up to his neck, so the ants could consume their food. Unbelievably, a missionary from the United States who was driving by managed to convince the tribe to release Lopez into her custody by assuring them that she would give him over to the authorities. They came to an agreement, and Lopez was positioned at the rear of her Jeep truck. Following through on her promise, the woman handed him up to the Peruvian civil police. Unbelievably, the cops merely drove him to the border with Colombia and then released him thereafter. Number 4. Colombia and Ecuador. After arriving in Colombia, Lopez did not waste any time in continuing his slaughter. Soon after, he relocated to Ecuador, where he continued his practice of murdering between 2 and 3 young women every week. Later on, he would be cited as saying, "I like the girls in Ecuador. They are more gentle and trusting, more innocent." This statement was made several years later. The population was concerned about the alarmingly high number of girls who vanished. Families made an effort to find their missing children, including by placing advertisements in the neighborhood newspapers. An overflowing river brought the bodies of 4 of Lopez's victims onto the banks of the river in 1979, which confirmed their worries. The river was located close to the town of Ambato. At this point, the people of Ecuador were aware that there was a predator of children among them. Number 3. The monster captured. Lopez made an effort to kidnap Maria Poveda, who was 10 years old at the time, from a market 3 days after the bodies were found on the beach. Nevertheless, Carlina, the girl's mother, observed him going away with her daughter and screamed when she saw him. An irate mob encircled Lopez, and they subdued him to the ground until the police came. Lopez was unable to escape their grasp. From the moment the riverbank children were murdered, he was an immediate suspect in the case. Lopez was difficult and refused to answer questions, which was quite unfortunate for the law enforcement officials. Because of this, the investigator, Pastor Gonzalez, came up with an original conception. In order to gain Lopez's trust, Gonzalez pretended to be a fellow inmate and claimed that he was incarcerated for the crime of rape. In a short amount of time, the authorities obtained their confession, along with a great deal more. Number 2. Confession and sentence. Lopez was able to lead law enforcement to the bodies of more than 53 victims, all of whom he was able to recall the locations of. When his confessions were taken into consideration, he was officially charged with the murders of 110 children. It was stunning that the police did not press charges against him for the extra murders, despite the fact that he admitted to committing over 200 more murders. The reason given was that additional trials in Colombia and Peru would have been too complex and costly. Lopez entered his guilty plea on July 31, 1981, to a total of 53 counts of murder. On the other hand, the laws of Ecuador restrict a penalty of more than 20 years for murder, and Lopez was only sentenced to 16 years, which caused a great deal of anger and confusion among a great number of other countries. Number 1. Where is he? Even more aggravating was the fact that Lopez was freed on August 31, 1994, for good behavior, despite having only completed 14 years of his sentence. It was during his time in prison that he granted one of his few interviews to a reporter named Ron Leitner. In the conversation, he divulged the following chilling quote: "The moment that I have my hands around the throat of a young girl is a moment that is both amazing and divine. The moment I glance into her eyes, I notice that a particular brightness, a spark, instantly disappears. Briefly, her fingers begin to flutter. Exciting and captivating is the moment when a person passes away. Those who have really committed murder are the only ones who understand what I mean. When I am finally freed from my confinement, I shall experience that moment once more. I am looking forward to killing once more. I have made it my mission. Immediately after his release, he was repatriated to Colombia, where he was subjected to an attempt to convict him of a crime that occurred 20 years earlier. Instead, he was institutionalized after being diagnosed with mental illness. It took 3 years for him to be certified sane and released on a meager $50 bond, but he was finally released from the hospital. He went to see his elderly mother in an effort to steal money, but when he found out that she had none, he immediately sold her one and only bed and chair, and then he disappeared. In addition to hazy rumors and contradictory accounts, he was never identified or located again. On the other hand, Interpol issued a recommendation to the Colombian authorities in 2002, recommending that he be rearrested in connection with a renewed murder. And so ends the tale of Pedro Lopez, the monster of the Andes, a man who terrorized countless young lives and yet remains a virtual ghost in the annals of criminal history. It's a chilling reminder of the horrors that sometimes slip through the cracks. Thank you for watching Odd Occasions. If you found this video thought-provoking, please hit that like button, subscribe for more stories of the forgotten and the macabre, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Let us know in the comments below. Should the monster of the Andes be a name everyone knows? Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.